The winter wind cut through Sarah Jane's threadbare coat like a knife through butter, and she pulled it tighter around her shoulders as she climbed down from the converted wagon that had been her home for the past 3 months. The small wooden structure on wheels sat behind the winter livery stable in Carson City, Nevada, a dusty frontier town that had seen better days since the silver rush began to slow in 1882. She had painted the wagon herself, a faded blue that reminded her of happier times, and converted the interior into a cozy living space with a small stove, a narrow bed, and wooden crates that served as furniture. It was not much, but it was hers, bought with the last of her savings after her husband died from cholera on the wagon train west. The stable owner, Nathan Foster, had allowed her to park the wagon behind his livery in exchange for her help with bookkeeping and occasional assistance with the horses. He was a tall man in his late 20s with sandy brown hair that always seemed to fall across his forehead, no matter how many times he pushed it back, and green eyes that held both kindness and wariness in equal measure. Sarah was 24, and though she had been married before, she had never felt the flutter in her chest that came unbidden whenever Nathan smiled at her. She made her way to the stable that morning, her boots crunching in the light dusting of snow that had fallen overnight. The temperature had dropped considerably in the past week, and she could see her breath forming small clouds in front of her face. Inside the stable, she found Nathan mucking out one of the stalls, his sleeves rolled up despite the cold. "Morning, Sarah," he said, looking up from his work. His brow furrowed with concern. "You look half frozen. That wagon cannot be keeping you warm enough in this weather." "I am managing just fine," she replied, though her chattering teeth betrayed her words. She moved to the small desk in the corner where she kept his ledgers and began reviewing the accounts from the previous day. Nathan set down his pitchfork and walked over to her, his expression serious. "Sarah, I have been meaning to talk to you about something." She looked up, her heart suddenly racing. Was he going to ask her to leave? She had nowhere else to go, and Carson City was not exactly brimming with opportunities for widowed women with no family connections. "The house," he said, gesturing toward the modest 2-story building adjacent to the stable. "It has 3 bedrooms and I only use one. There is a perfectly good room on the first floor that gets heat from the kitchen stove. You should move into the house." Sarah felt her cheeks flush. "I could not possibly do that. What would people say?" "People will say whatever they want to say regardless of what we do or do not do," Nathan replied, his voice firm but gentle. "But what matters is that you are going to freeze to death in that wagon, and I will not have that on my conscience. The room has its own entrance through the side door, so you can come and go as you please. We can keep everything proper and respectable." She studied his face, looking for any sign of impropriety, but saw only genuine concern. "I cannot afford to pay much in rent." "I am not asking for rent," he said. "You already earn your keep with the bookwork and helping with the horses. Consider it part of your compensation." Sarah wanted to refuse on principle, but the thought of a warm room with a real bed and protection from the wind was too tempting to resist. "If you are certain it would not be an imposition." "I am certain," Nathan said, and his smile reached his eyes in a way that made her heart skip. That afternoon, Nathan helped her move her meager belongings into the house. The room he offered was indeed on the first floor, with a window that looked out onto the main street of Carson City. It had a proper bed with a feather mattress, a wardrobe, a small writing desk, and a washstand. Compared to the cramped wagon, it felt like a palace. "There are fresh linens in the wardrobe," Nathan said, setting down the last of her wooden crates. "And you are welcome to use the kitchen whenever you need. I usually make breakfast around 6 and supper around 7 if you would like to join me. or you can prepare your own meals. Whatever makes you comfortable. Thank you, Nathan, Sarah said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. This is incredibly generous, he shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. It is just a room that was sitting empty. No sense in letting it go to waste while you are out there freezing. After he left, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. The room was warm, gloriously warm, and she could hear the crackling of the fire in the kitchen stove through the wall. For the first time in months, she felt something close to safe. Over the following weeks, Sarah and Nathan fell into a comfortable routine. She would rise early and help him with the morning feeding, then work on the stable accounts while he tended to the horses and met with customers. Carson City was still busy enough to keep the livery profitable, with miners, ranchers, and travelers passing through on a regular basis. She discovered that Nathan was not just a stable owner but an excellent horseman who had a reputation for training even the most difficult animals. They began taking meals together, at first awkwardly and with much attention paid to propriety, but gradually with increasing ease. Sarah learned that Nathan had come west from Missouri 5 years earlier, leaving behind a family farm after his father died and his older brother inherited everything. He had worked as a ranch hand and a cavalry scout before saving enough money to buy the livery stable 2 years ago. "What brought you to Carson City?" he asked one evening over a simple meal of beef stew and biscuits. Sarah wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, drawing strength from its warmth. "My husband, James, had silver fever. He heard about the strikes in Nevada and was convinced we would make our fortune. We joined a wagon train in Missouri last spring. He caught cholera 3 weeks into the journey and died within 2 days. The wagon master gave me a choice: turn back on my own or continue with the train. I had already sold everything we owned to make the trip, so I continued on." "I am sorry for your loss," Nathan said, and she could tell he meant it. "We had only been married 6 months, she admitted. "It was an arrangement, really. My father died and left debts, and James offered to pay them in exchange for marriage. He was not a bad man, just a dreamer who never looked at the practical side of things. I cared for him, but I did not love him. Does that make me terrible?" "No," Nathan said firmly. "It makes you honest." As winter deepened, Sarah found herself looking forward to their evening meals with an anticipation that had nothing to do with hunger. She noticed small things about Nathan. The way he always checked to make sure the horses had extra feed on particularly cold nights. How he never turned away a customer, even if they were down on their luck. The gentleness with which he handled even the most skittish animals. He was patient and kind, but also strong and capable. She had seen him break up a fight between 2 drunk miners without breaking a sweat, his voice calm but commanding as he ordered them to take their dispute elsewhere. One evening in late January, a blizzard struck Carson City with unexpected ferocity. The wind howled like a living thing, and snow piled up against the buildings in massive drifts. Nathan made several trips to the stable throughout the night, checking on the horses and making sure the building remained secure. Sarah waited up for him each time, heating water for coffee and having a warm cup ready when he returned. "You should get some sleep," he said on his 3rd trip back, stamping snow from his boots in the mudroom. His face was red from the cold and ice had formed on his eyebrows. "So should you," she replied, handing him the coffee. "But I suspect neither of us will until this storm passes." They sat together in the kitchen, listening to the wind rattle the windows. The intimacy of the moment was not lost on Sarah. Here they were, alone in the warm house while the world raged outside, and she felt more comfortable with Nathan than she had ever felt with her own husband. "Can I ask you something?" Nathan said, breaking the companionable silence. "Of course." You ever think about leaving Carson City, going back east or moving to San Francisco? Sarah considered the question carefully. I did at first. When James died, I thought about using what little money I had left to buy a ticket back to Missouri. But there is nothing for me there. My mother died when I was young, my father is gone, and I have no siblings. At least here I have work and a place to live. I have a purpose. And friends. Nathan asked, his green eyes searching her face. Yes, she said softly. And friends. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily since the day they met. Nathan reached across the table and took her hand, his rough calluses pressing against her palm. Sarah, I need to be honest with you. These past few months, having you here, getting to know you, it has meant more to me than I can properly express. I look forward to seeing you every morning. I find myself thinking about you throughout the day. And if I am reading this situation entirely wrong, please tell me now so I can endeavor to maintain a proper distance. Her heart hammered in her chest. You are not reading it wrong. He stood and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye to eye. I know you have been through a great deal, and I do not want to rush you into anything, but I need you to know that my feelings for you are genuine. I care about you deeply, Sarah Jane. She cupped his cold face in her hands. I care about you too, Nathan Foster, more than I thought possible. He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle at first, then with increasing passion. Sarah felt as though she had been waiting her entire life for this moment, for this man. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. We should probably talk about this when we are not both exhausted and dealing with a blizzard, Nathan said, a smile tugging at his lips. Probably, Sarah agreed, but I am glad it happened anyway. They stayed up the rest of the night, talking about everything and nothing, holding hands across the kitchen table like young sweethearts. By the time dawn broke and the storm began to subside, Sarah felt as though she had known Nathan her entire life. The following weeks were a revelation. They courted properly, with Nathan taking Sarah to church socials and the occasional dinner at the hotel restaurant. Carson City being a small town, word spread quickly about the stable owner and the widow, but the gossip was mostly benign. Sarah had made friends among the townswomen through her work at the Livery, and most seemed pleased that she had found happiness again. Nathan was attentive without being overbearing, respectful of her need for propriety while making his intentions clear. He brought her small gifts, a book of poetry from the general store, a warm shawl in a deep blue that matched her eyes, a delicate cameo brooch that had belonged to his mother. In return, Sarah cooked special meals, mended his clothes, and helped him expand the livery business by suggesting they offer riding lessons to the children of the wealthier mine owners. Spring came to Carson City in a rush of melting snow and budding trees. The town seemed to shake off its winter lethargy, and business at the Livery picked up considerably. Nathan hired a young man named Thomas to help with the daily work, which gave him more free time to spend with Sarah. One warm April evening, Nathan saddled two of his gentlest horses and took Sarah riding into the hills outside town. The desert was abloom with wildflowers, painting the landscape in shades of purple, yellow, and orange. They rode to a high point overlooking the valley where they could see Carson City spread out below them, small and almost quaint in the fading light. I have been thinking, Nathan said as they stood beside the horses, looking at the view, about the future, about what I want my life to look like. Sarah's breath caught. And what do you see? He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I see you. I see us building a life together, expanding the Livery, maybe starting a family someday if that is something you would want. I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but Sarah, I am certain about this. I am certain about you. Nathan. He dropped to one knee, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. Sarah Jane, would you do me the tremendous honor of becoming my wife? Tears sprang to her eyes, but they were tears of joy. Yes. Yes, absolutely yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that made her dizzy, and she kissed him back with equal fervor. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church on the edge of town, with half of Carson City in attendance. Sarah wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Nathan had special ordered from San Francisco, and she carried a bouquet of the same wildflowers that had surrounded them when he proposed. Nathan wore a new suit and looked so handsome that Sarah felt her heart might burst with happiness. The Reverend, an elderly man named Pastor Williams who had performed more wedding ceremonies than he could count, pronounced them husband and wife with a broad smile. You may kiss your bride, son. Nathan did not need to be told twice. He pulled Sarah close and kissed her thoroughly, earning whoops and hollers from the assembled guests. The reception was held at the Livery, which Sarah and several of the townswomen had spent days decorating with ribbons and flowers. There was food and music and dancing, and Sarah felt more alive than she had in years. She danced with Nathan, with old miners who gallantly asked for a turn, with the young stable-hand Thomas, and even with Pastor Williams, who proved surprisingly spry for his age. As the celebration wound down and the last guests departed, Nathan carried Sarah over the threshold of the house that was now truly theirs. He set her down gently in the bedroom they would share, the same room where she had spent her first night after leaving the wagon. Happy? He asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Happier than I ever thought possible, she replied honestly. That night, they came together as husband and wife, and Sarah discovered what it meant to truly make love with someone. Nathan was tender and patient, attentive to her needs and responses. Where her first marriage had been dutiful and somewhat mechanical, this was passionate and joyful. They learned each other's bodies, whispered words of love and devotion, and fell asleep tangled together as the moon rose high over Carson City. The following months passed in a blur of happiness. Sarah and Nathan ran the Livery together, a true partnership in every sense of the word. The riding lessons proved profitable, and they were able to purchase 3 more horses to accommodate the demand. Sarah also began offering bookkeeping services to other businesses in town, building a small but steady income of her own. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Nathan was an early riser, so Sarah adjusted her schedule to match his, enjoying their quiet mornings together before the business of the day began. They worked side by side, ate meals together, and spent their evenings planning for the future. On Sundays, they attended church and then took long rides into the countryside, exploring the wild beauty of Nevada. Summer brought intense heat, and Sarah learned to appreciate the cool stone walls of the Livery and the shade provided by the cottonwood trees Nathan had planted years earlier. She also discovered she was pregnant in late July, though she waited until she was certain before telling Nathan. She chose a moment when they were alone in the house, the day's work finished, and the evening stretching peacefully before them. Nathan was reading a newspaper in his favorite chair, and Sarah sat beside him with her mending. Nathan, I have something to tell you, she said, setting down her needle and thread. He looked up immediately, catching something in her tone. What is it? Is something wrong? No, nothing is wrong. Everything is very, very right. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. We are going to have a baby. The look of pure joy that spread across his face was something she would remember for the rest of her life. "Truly, we are going to be parents." "Truly," she confirmed, laughing as he pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "When, the doctor thinks February, a winter baby." Nathan pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Sarah, you have made me the happiest man alive. First by agreeing to marry me, and now this. I cannot believe how blessed I am." "We are blessed," she corrected gently. "Both of us." The pregnancy was relatively easy, for which Sarah was grateful. She experienced some morning sickness in the early months, but Nathan was unfailingly patient, bringing her crackers and tea before she even had to ask. As her belly grew, he became almost comically protective, insisting she avoid heavy lifting and constantly fussing over her comfort. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him one day as he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know, but I cannot help worrying," he admitted. "You and this baby are everything to me." His words touched her deeply. She wrapped her arms around him as best she could with her expanding waistline. "We are going to be fine, both of us." As autumn painted the hills around Carson City in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah prepared for the baby's arrival. The townswomen threw a lovely gathering in her honor, bringing tiny clothes and blankets and offering advice both solicited and not. Nathan converted the small third bedroom into a nursery, building a cradle with his own hands and painting the walls a cheerful yellow. Winter arrived early that year, and Sarah's due date approached with increasing speed. On a cold February morning, she woke Nathan with a hand on his shoulder. "It is time," she said calmly, though her eyes betrayed her nervousness. Nathan was out of bed instantly, pulling on his clothes and running to fetch the doctor and the midwife. Sarah labored through the day and into the night, with Nathan holding her hand and offering words of encouragement. The pain was intense, far worse than anything she had imagined, but every time she felt like giving up, she looked at Nathan's face and found the strength to continue. Finally, just after midnight, their son came into the world with a lusty cry. The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Sarah's arms. "He is perfect," Sarah whispered, staring down at the tiny face with wonder. Nathan, who had tears streaming down his face, leaned in close. "He has your nose." "And your eyes," Sarah said, noticing the green tint already visible in their son's gaze. They named him James after Sarah's first husband, because she wanted to honor the man who had brought her west, even if he had not lived to see the life she had built. Nathan supported the decision wholeheartedly, understanding that Sarah's past was part of what made her who she was. Baby James proved to be a good-natured infant who ate well and slept reasonably, for which both parents were grateful. Nathan was a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings and diaper changes without complaint. Sarah would often wake to find him standing beside the cradle, simply watching their son sleep with an expression of awe on his face. "I never knew I could love someone so much so quickly," he told her one night. "Except for you, of course. But this is different. He is so small, so helpless. I would do anything to protect him." "I know exactly what you mean," Sarah replied, thinking how her life had changed so dramatically in just over a year. She had gone from living in a converted wagon, alone and uncertain, to being a wife and mother with a home and a family. As James grew from an infant into a toddler, the livery business continued to thrive. Nathan took on another employee, allowing him more time with his family. Sarah reduced her bookkeeping work to focus on raising their son, though she still maintained the livery accounts and helped with the riding lessons when she could. On their second wedding anniversary, Nathan surprised Sarah with a gift, The converted wagon that had been her first home in Carson City, fully restored and painted a fresh, cheerful blue. "I thought we could keep it as a reminder," he explained as she stared at it in surprise, "of where we started and how far we have come. Someday, when James is older, we can tell him the story of how his mother lived in this wagon and his father fell in love with her determination and strength." Sarah threw her arms around Nathan, kissing him soundly. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "Hardly perfect," he demurred. "But I try my best for you and James." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the next few years. James grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the horses and followed his father around the livery whenever allowed. Sarah taught him his letters and numbers, preparing him for the school he would eventually attend in town. She and Nathan talked often about having more children, but Sarah suffered 2 miscarriages that left her physically and emotionally drained. "Maybe James will be our only child," she said sadly after the second loss. Nathan held her while she cried, his own grief evident but tempered by his desire to comfort her. "Then we will pour all our love into him and be grateful for the blessing we have. You are enough, Sarah. You have always been enough, with or without children." His words helped heal her heart, and while she still felt the ache of loss, she learned to accept what could not be changed. They focused their energy on James and the livery, which had become one of the most successful businesses in Carson City. Nathan's reputation as a horseman spread throughout Nevada, and people came from miles around to purchase animals he had trained or to seek his advice on difficult horses. When James was 5 years old, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. She was afraid to hope, afraid to tell Nathan until she was further along, but he noticed the signs almost immediately. "Sarah," he said one morning at breakfast, "are you?" She nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. "How far along?" "3 months. I did not want to say anything until I was sure." Nathan came around the table and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Whatever happens, we face it together. But I believe this one is going to be fine. I can feel it." His optimism proved correct. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in the spring of 1888, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Elizabeth Rose, and she had Sarah's dark hair and Nathan's green eyes. James was enchanted with his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help care for her. "Gentle," Sarah reminded him as he touched Elizabeth's tiny hand. "She is very delicate." "I will always protect her," James declared with all the seriousness a 5-year-old could muster. "Nobody will ever hurt my sister." Nathan caught Sarah's eye over their children's heads, and they shared a smile full of love and contentment. The years that followed were busy but joyful. Elizabeth grew into a spirited child who kept her parents on their toes. She had her father's love of horses and her mother's head for numbers, and she charmed everyone she met. James started school and proved to be an excellent student, though he made it clear he intended to run the livery with his father when he grew up. Carson City evolved around them, becoming more civilized as Nevada matured from a wild frontier into an established state. Electric lights came to the main street in 1890, and a telephone exchange opened the following year. The livery adapted with the times, adding services like wagon repair and freight hauling to supplement the traditional stable business. Through it all, Sarah and Nathan's love remained strong. They still took Sunday rides when possible, now with their children in tow. They still shared quiet evenings in the kitchen, talking about their days and making plans for the future. They still looked at each other across a crowded room and felt the same spark that had first ignited during a winter blizzard years earlier. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they renewed their vows in the same church where they had married, with James and Elizabeth standing up beside them. Sarah wore the same cream silk dress, altered slightly to accommodate the changes 10 years and 2 children had brought to her figure. Nathan wore the same suit, though it was a bit snugger in the shoulders thanks to the physical work of running the livery. Pastor Williams, now quite elderly but still sharp as a tack, performed the ceremony with tears in his eyes. I have married many couples in my years serving this community, but I have rarely seen a love as true and enduring as yours. May you have many more years of happiness together. After the ceremony, they held a celebration at the livery, much like their wedding reception. James and Elizabeth ran around with the other children while the adults ate and danced and reminisced. As the sun set over the Nevada hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Nathan pulled Sarah into his arms for a slow dance. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" He murmured into her hair. "You tell me every day," she replied, "both with words and with actions. I am so grateful for the life we have built together." "I am the grateful one. You took a chance on a simple, stable owner, and you have given me more joy than I ever dreamed possible." Sarah pulled back to look at him, this man who had offered her shelter when she needed it most, who had seen past her circumstances to the person she was, who had loved her with patience and kindness and unwavering devotion. "You are not a simple anything, Nathan Foster. You are extraordinary." As they danced under the stars, surrounded by friends and family and the evidence of the successful life they had created, Sarah thought back to that cold morning when she had climbed down from her converted wagon, uncertain and alone. She could never have imagined then how much her life would change, how deeply she would come to love, or how completely happy she could be. The converted wagon still sat behind the livery, preserved as a reminder of humble beginnings. Sometimes, when Sarah needed a moment of quiet reflection, she would sit inside it and remember those early days. The fear, yes, but also the hope. The loneliness, but also the first stirrings of attraction to the kind, stable owner who had offered her more than just shelter from the cold. As the years continued to pass, the Foster family became an integral part of Carson City. James grew into a fine young man who indeed took over much of the day-to-day operation of the livery, allowing Nathan to slow down as he approached 50. Elizabeth surprised everyone by developing a passion for medicine, inspired by old Dr. Matthews who had delivered her. She began apprenticing with him when she turned 15, learning everything she could about healing. Sarah continued her bookkeeping work, now managing the accounts for several businesses in town. She became known as a savvy businesswoman, and other women often sought her advice on financial matters. She used her position to help other widows and women in difficult circumstances, remembering all too well what it felt like to be alone and uncertain. Nathan aged gracefully, his sandy hair turning silver at the temples but his green eyes remaining as bright and sharp as ever. He still rode every day, still trained difficult horses, still looked at Sarah with the same love and desire he had shown on their wedding night. They grew old together, their love deepening and maturing like fine wine. When James was 22, he married a sweet girl named Catherine, and they built a house next to the livery. 2 years later, they made Sarah and Nathan grandparents with the birth of a son they named Nathan James. Sarah held her grandson for the first time and felt the circle of life completing itself. She remembered holding her own children, the fierce love and protectiveness that had overwhelmed her, and now she got to experience it all over again. Elizabeth followed a different path, choosing education over early marriage. She studied with Dr. Matthews until his retirement, then traveled to San Francisco to attend a nursing program. She returned to Carson City as a certified nurse and opened a small clinic, becoming the first female medical professional in town. She eventually married a schoolteacher named William, and they had 3 children who were as spirited and intelligent as their mother. Sarah and Nathan spent their later years surrounded by family, their home always full of children and grandchildren. They expanded the house to accommodate Sunday dinners, where the entire family would gather to eat and talk and laugh. Nathan would tell stories about the early days of the livery, and Sarah would add her own memories, painting a picture of Carson City in the 1880s for the younger generation. On quiet evenings when the house was empty and the day's work done, Sarah and Nathan would sit together on the porch, holding hands and watching the sun set over the hills. These were Sarah's favorite moments, simple and peaceful, with the man she loved beside her and a lifetime of memories behind them. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked one evening, breaking the comfortable silence. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray and their faces lined with the passage of time. "Regret what?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew what he meant. "Coming west. Everything you went through, the hardship and the loss." Sarah considered the question seriously, as it deserved. "I regret that James died so young, and I regret the pain that came with the miscarriages. But do I regret coming west? Never. Because if I had not, I would never have met you. I would never have built this life, had our children known this kind of love. Every difficult moment was worth it to get here." Nathan squeezed her hand. "I think about that sometimes, about how close we came to never meeting. If you had turned back with the wagon train, or if you had chosen to settle in a different town. Life is strange that way, how one small decision can change everything." "It was not just one decision," Sarah pointed out. "It was a series of them. My decision to continue west, my decision to settle in Carson City, my decision to accept your offer to move into the house, and your decision to offer in the first place." "That was not really a decision," Nathan said with a smile. "I saw you living in that wagon and I knew I had to help. I did not realize then that I was already falling in love with you, but looking back, I think I was." "I was falling in love with you too," Sarah admitted. "I just did not recognize it at first. I thought I was simply grateful for your kindness, but it was more than that, even then." They sat in silence for a while longer, comfortable in each other's presence, as only 2 people who had spent a lifetime together could be. The evening air carried the scent of the desert, sage and dust, and something indefinably wild. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and Nathan's horses whinnied in response. "We have built a good life," Nathan said finally. "A really good life." "We have," Sarah agreed, "and I would not change a single thing." As they sat together watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Carson City as a widow, alone and uncertain, living in a converted wagon and wondering what the future held. She had been offered kindness by a cowboy stable owner, kindness that had turned into friendship, then love, then a lifetime partnership. Together, they had built something lasting. Not just a successful business, but a family, a legacy, a love story that would be passed down through generations. Their children and grandchildren would tell their own children about the woman who lived in a converted wagon behind the winter livery, and the stable owner who told her to move into the house. They would tell about the love that grew between them, strong and true and enduring. The years continued to pass, bringing with them all the joys and sorrows that life provides. Sarah and Nathan celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, welcomed more grandchildren into the family, and mourned the loss of friends and contemporaries. Through it all, they remained each other's constant, each other's home. When Nathan fell ill in the winter of 1905, Sarah refused to leave his side. She sat beside his bed in the room they had shared for over 20 years, holding his hand and reminiscing about their life together. James and Elizabeth came with their families, filling the house with the noise and chaos of living, but Sarah only had eyes for Nathan. "I am not ready to let you go," she whispered one night when they were alone. Nathan, weak but still lucid, smiled at her. "We have had more time together than most people ever get. We have loved deeply and lived fully. When my time comes, I will go knowing that I was blessed beyond measure. But what will I do without you? You will do what you have always done. You will be strong and capable and full of grace. You will love our children and grandchildren. You will remember the good times and smile. And someday, when your own time comes, I will be waiting for you." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "I love you, Nathan Foster. I have loved you since that winter morning when you offered me shelter. And I have loved you since the moment I first saw you climbing down from that converted wagon, determined and fierce and beautiful. You changed my life, Sarah Jane." Nathan passed peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by his family. Sarah held his hand as he took his last breath, feeling as though a part of her own soul had departed with him. The funeral was attended by seemingly the entire population of Carson City, a testament to how much Nathan had been loved and respected in the community. In the months that followed, Sarah grieved deeply but not without hope. She had Nathan's children and grandchildren, and she had her memories. She had the livery, which James now ran with his own son. She had the converted wagon, still sitting behind the stable, a symbol of beginnings and possibilities. And she had the knowledge that she had been truly, deeply, completely loved by a good man. She continued to live in the house, refusing all suggestions from her children that she move in with one of them. This was her home, filled with Nathan's presence in every corner. She could feel him in the kitchen where they had shared so many meals, in the bedroom where they had loved and laughed and comforted each other, in the porch where they had sat together watching countless sunsets. Elizabeth's oldest daughter, a bright girl named Sarah after her grandmother, began spending time with her. She would listen for hours as Sarah told stories about Nathan, about their courtship and their life together. These conversations brought Sarah comfort, and she found joy in passing on the family history to the next generation. "Tell me again about the blizzard," young Sarah would say. "About the night grandfather told you he loved you." And Sarah would tell the story, her voice warm with memory, describing the howling wind and the warm kitchen and the moment when everything changed. She would talk about Nathan's kindness, his strength, his unwavering love, and in the telling, she would feel him close once more. Sarah lived another 12 years after Nathan's death, years filled with watching her grandchildren grow and her great-grandchildren being born. She saw the livery continue to prosper under James's management, adapting to the changing times as automobiles began to appear on the streets of Carson City. She saw Elizabeth's clinic expand and thrive. She saw the converted wagon become a beloved family heirloom, preserved carefully as a reminder of where it all began. On a warm spring day in 1917, Sarah Jane Foster passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. She was laid to rest beside Nathan in the Carson City Cemetery, their headstones side by side, united in death as they had been in life. The inscription on her headstone read, "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she lived with courage and loved with her whole heart." At her funeral, James spoke about his mother's strength and determination, how she had come to Carson City with nothing and built a life through sheer will and hard work. Elizabeth talked about her mother's kindness and wisdom, how she had always made time for those who needed help. And young Sarah, now a woman with children of her own, told the story of the converted wagon and the stable owner, of love found in unexpected places, of two people who had chosen each other and never looked back. The converted wagon remained behind the livery for generations, carefully maintained by the Foster family. It became a local landmark, a piece of Carson City history. Tour guides would point it out to visitors, telling the story of Sarah Jane Johnson, who came west as a widow and found love with Nathan Foster, the stable owner who offered her more than just shelter from the cold. The winter livery itself evolved over the decades, eventually becoming a historical site. James's great-grandson converted it into a museum dedicated to the history of Carson City and the role the livery had played in the town's development. The converted wagon was moved inside, protected from the elements, with plaques telling Sarah and Nathan's story for all who visited. Their descendants spread across Nevada and beyond, carrying with them the legacy of love and determination that Sarah and Nathan had established. Family reunions were held annually, with Foster relatives traveling from across the country to gather in Carson City and visit the museum, to see the wagon and the livery, and to remember where it all began. The love story of Sarah Jane Johnson and Nathan Foster became a cherished family legend, passed down through generations as an example of how love can bloom in the most unexpected circumstances, how kindness can change lives, and how two people committed to each other can build something that lasts far beyond their own lifetimes. In the end, it was a simple story. A woman living in a converted wagon behind a livery stable, a cowboy stable owner who told her to move into the house. And from that act of kindness, a love grew that transformed two lives, created a family, and left a legacy that endured long after both Sarah and Nathan had passed from this world. It was a story of the Wild West, of hard times and harder choices, of loss and redemption, of finding home in an unexpected place. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and true, the kind that reminds us all of the transformative power of opening our hearts to another person, of choosing love over fear, of building a life together one day at a time. And somewhere in the vast Nevada sky, if one believed in such things, two souls sat together watching the sunset, their hands clasped, their hearts full, their love eternal.